Hey everybody, this is Kat from Magoosh, and today I want to share some MCAT tips that are not exclusive to, but of particular importance to students who might identify as non-traditional. And so that could be somebody who has switched majors. Maybe you're not coming from a science background, or somebody who's taken a number of years off school. These days, taking a gap year is, I think, it's like considered non-traditional, but I think that convention is probably going to fall away pretty soon because taking a gap year is becoming the norm. And now, even if you have, though, only taken like maybe 1 year off, 2 years off, it can be hard to get started again. You're in a different situation. You might not have a peer group of people that you can rely on who've been going through the same thing, maybe who served as study partners during your undergraduate time. And then, of course, everything else that can come with work situations, family life. Maybe you have children. So even if you don't identify as a non-traditional student, but particularly if you do, I hope that these tips will inspire you and maybe focus you, get you taking the next step towards your MCAT studies, especially if you feel like you're stuck or stalled, which is something I hear all the time. Now, I'll say that I'm particularly, I feel an affinity for those of you who do identify as non-traditional students or who are in the position of maybe pursuing med school when you thought you would do something else or you have been doing something else. I had thought that I would be a medical social worker, and so I actually went through the entire application process. I was accepted. I was ready to go to San Diego State and do medical social work, and then I realized that I just wasn't as passionate about it as doing research, influencing medical school education. And I made the difficult decision to switch directions. And ultimately, it really paid off. I was able to go to UC San Francisco, get a PhD in the social and behavioral sciences, do exactly what it was that I wanted to do. But it was hard. I had to backpedal a little bit. I had to raise my GRE scores. I had to get lab experience. I had to get letters of rec that were going to count in that kind of a competitive admissions environment. And so even though I don't have an MD, I've been more on the advising and teaching side when it comes to actual MD programs. I know that it can be really hard and really scary, and you can sometimes feel lost. And so my advice here is I'm going to focus on MCAT prep and study tips. But just know that I'm thinking about you more holistically. I know at least some of what some of you are going through. And I know that if you have made the difficult decision to switch careers or go to med school after taking time off, that more than likely it means that you have a level of passion and focus that many of the people that are applying don't have. A lot of people go straight into medical school. Maybe they just always thought they would be a doctor, and that's the direction they're going. And you might be benefiting from this extra work that is entailed in making a difficult decision like that. Now, I know that many of you are coming from all different types of situations, but I know that is one portion of the students that we hear a lot from at Magoosh, and so I'm acknowledging you in this video, as well as the rest of you. So some of the main questions, and I really do want to hit on the main questions because there are ones that I get repeatedly, and I want this chance to be able to share them broadly, share my insights and my tips and answers, is how do I get started? You know, maybe you've been working full time. You haven't even been in a study groove for a while, or maybe you're doing a post-bac and you have your rhythm. You barely have any breathing room as it is. How do you even get into motion studying for the MCAT? My advice in terms of getting started, if you haven't already, is to take the AAMC sample test. I know it's scary. I know that you might judge yourself harshly because you might not get the type of score on that as you're aiming for, or as that you know you're capable of, or maybe even worse, you're afraid that that is all you're capable of. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. You don't even have to look at their score estimate. That's not why I want you to do this. I want you to do this partly to get a sense of the MCAT. I want you to do this because it's a concrete thing that you can do right now. It doesn't require a lot of planning or prep. You can just start it, ideally under timed circumstances all at once. But for the purposes of the sample test, I think it really is okay to split it up. So if you need to do section by section and time those, I think that's fine. What this is it's a starting point, and it's an opportunity for you to assess yourself in different areas that the AAMC has designated as important content areas and also important skills, answering skills. So they break up their questions into the different skill sets that they believe you need to possess in order to answer such and such question effectively and arrive at the right answer. So do that and just spend some time with it. Read the answer explanations. Keep track of which questions are you missing based on content deficits. And if it's 80% of them, that's okay. That's your starting place. You cannot change your starting place. It is what it is. Wherever you are right now, that's where you are. That's your starting place, okay? So putting off the test or judging yourself about your performance on the test isn't going to change where you're starting from. The past is behind you. You are where you are, and your focus needs to be on where you're going. And that it takes a little bit of practice sometimes to put those judgments aside. Many of you have been top grade earners, for lack of a better term, students. Most people who apply for med school at least have absorbed the message that if they don't have, some quite high GPA, that they're not competitive, their grades aren't high enough. And for purposes of studying for the MCAT, I think it's best for you to table that. Okay, you already know that. You don't need to reiterate that inside you. Grades matter, MCAT scores matter. Yeah, we know that. That's why Reddit can be a dangerous place to play when you're starting out, or when you're about to take the test, or quite frankly, even in the middle. But the point here is to be objective. Practice it. You're going to need this skill when you are a doctor to be able to take a step back. We all have emotions. Emotions are fantastic. They're going to serve you as a doctor. But there are certain instances where it's really, really valuable to be able to put those judgments aside, to take a step back, to use your cool, collected thinking. And this is a chance for you to do it right now. Years before you get to the end, you have a chance right now to start practicing some of those skills. And it's not surprising that those are the skills it takes to do well at the MCAT, because that's partly what you're being tested on. You're being tested on content, but you're also being tested on, I've started to believe more and more, the longer I do this, the more I work with the MCAT, work with MCAT students, can you keep the cool when a difficult question comes your way? And if you can't right now, that's okay. That's fine. Again, that's where you're starting from. Just know that that is part of the skill set you're going to be developing. Can you learn how to say, this is something I just don't know at all on test day, and say, yeah, there's one. Okay, I'm going to just skip that over. I'll come back to it later. And then have that not influence how you go into the next question. Now, I'm saying this not because I expect you to be able to do this immediately right now, just because I'm telling you to. It's because I'm trying to give you a sense of where you want to get to. And it's actually it's very empowering and kind of inspiring to think of getting to that place, because it's there are a whole bunch of books in the genre of mental toughness, and I have mixed feelings about these books because they can be some of them, I don't necessarily agree with the whole philosophy or the stance, but there is something to the ability to just get up when you get knocked down. And that's a lot of what the MCAT is about. It's a lot of what the whole field of medicine, for better and for worse, is about. So that's the direction you're going, and it's kind of, it's a chance to start exercising some of those skills. So that's where I recommend you start going. The other thing to do is to just start with some kind of a study plan. There are many free ones online. Magoosh has study plans. We have them on our blogs that you can download. They're made to be followed with our Magoosh course, but I know students that have followed them just using their other prep materials as well. You can still sort of figure out like which topics we're telling you to study on which days and how many questions to answer. It might not wind up being, whether it's Magoosh or another company's study schedule that you go with, it might not ultimately be the one that works for you or the one you stick with. It doesn't matter. It's okay. You're not looking for the perfect study schedule. You're looking for something to get you in motion. So those are the first two things you can do. Next question I get a lot is, what do I do to review this material that I haven't seen in 5, 10, 15, for some people that we work with, 20 even years? I don't even know how to start reviewing content for some of these areas. And what I recommend here is to do some kind of high level, and by that I mean somewhat cursory, somewhat big picture content review that's either in the form of, a lot of the students we work with, many of them gravitate towards us because they really like the video format or audio format. If that works for you, do videos such as Magoosh or Khan Academy, to whatever degree that those are available when you're watching this. And then other students do really well with MCAT prep books. And in that case, what I would say is to start with, just read the chapter summaries at the end. So say you're trying to review on physics or general chemistry, start with the summaries of the chapter. What you want to do is you want to start narrowing in. And so the first step is to try and just see the big picture. And there's also just something really nice about when you first look at the material, and some people might disagree with me on this, but you don't want to immediately, if it's been a long time since you've seen it, immediately jump into practice questions, unless you feel like you can and you have enough of a memory, you can start doing some stoichiometry. But just looking at the chapter review is a really nice place to kind of get the lay of the land, see what it is that you actually need to know. And then from there, watch the videos in more depth and take notes, or read the chapter in more detail. And then from there, start doing some of the practice questions that are introduced in lessons and in the chapter, or you could do that subsequently. You could do it concurrently with starting to read or watch in more detail. And pretty soon you want to be in a rhythm where you're devoting, I think in the beginning, about 80% of your time to content review, but make sure that you're always reserving some time for practice questions. Okay. So the next couple of things I want to say have to do with test anxiety, imposter syndrome, or inferiority complexes that really seem to come up and get people when they go to take practice exams, or sometimes, unfortunately, on actual full-length exams or the actual MCAT. And the first thing that I want to recommend is to really think about this idea of what it means to be in the zone. So people say, oh, I have test anxiety. I've always had test anxiety. Put that aside for now. I mean, I think that's valid, and that's good to know that that's been your tendency in the past. It doesn't mean it's always going to be your tendency. So be a little bit careful with the labels you're giving yourself. What I would say is, when you look at the most effective test takers, and I don't necessarily mean the people who are most prepared, I don't necessarily mean the people who are the top scorers, but the people who are able to do the best given where they're coming from, the people who just seem to get into the groove when they do take tests, they're people who are able to get into the zone. And the best way to think about what this feels like is to relate it to something that works for you. So if you've done sports, you've had moments of being in the zone. If you are a swimmer, you know what it's like to be in the zone. If you have hobbies that are all consuming, if you play music, for many of you, you're curious, you love learning, and that puts you in the zone. I get that way. I can just start researching something open-ended and just get completely lost and love it. Lose track of time, lose track of what's around me. You don't want to lose track of the time, but you do want to kind of try and capture this experience of where everything in front of you is riveting and the background starts to fade away. That's the type of mindset that people who do really well on tests, given where they're coming from, that's what they're able to, the state of consciousness that they're tapped into. And so you can actually sort of mimic or approximate the state of consciousness with certain tricks. One thing that we know that happens to people when they're in the zone is background noises become very dim. And so earplugs can be one way to kind of like reproduce this sensation. Another thing is that what you're looking at starts to look magnified. It starts to be the universe. It starts to look larger than life. So you don't want to be far away from your screen, like actually just being really close to your screen, being sitting up, letting your field of vision be entirely consumed with what you're reading. That's focus. That's being in the zone. It's what you need on the MCAT, because not only is it going to help with anxiety, but it's going to help with your speed. So that's another thing that I hear students say a lot. I run out of time. Part of this is just practice. The MCAT is a time-sensitive test, certain sections in particular. But one thing that's going to help is focus. And what I'm starting to realize more and more is that it's not so much that a lot of students struggle with their reading speed per se. That is true for some students. It's more a matter of focus. It's more a matter of they read a sentence and aren't quite comprehending it as they're reading it. And so they are taking a step back and trying to assimilate and think, or maybe rereading it. Now I realize there are a lot of different learning styles and cognitive styles, and for some people it's your natural comprehension style is that way. And if so, I would encourage you to look into seeing if you can get additional time on the MCAT. You might qualify if this is just cognitively the way that your brain works and has always worked. It's just something to put out there. But for a lot of students, I think it's more a matter of just focus. And I think when you can tap into this kind of larger than life, what's in front of me is riveting, you actually don't have as many of those double takes. You don't have as much of that going back and rereading. Think about when you're really interested in something, and it can be anything. It can be something that you might judge as frivolous, I don't know, celebrity gossip, anything. It doesn't matter what it is. The point is when you're all consumed with something, when something really just naturally pulls your interest, you don't have to read it twice. The first time you read it, you're getting something out of it. The other part of this sort of imposter syndrome, as I'm calling it here, is what I've see as students kind of like having a cruel inner committee in their mind as they're reading a passage. And I can say that this has happened to me. So I've always been, a good reader. I've always done well on reading sections of standardized tests. When I first started taking CARS passages, my reading wasn't nearly as it wasn't up to my own expectations, given what how I had performed on SAT, ACT, things like that, other standardized tests. And what that did for me when I realized that I wasn't in, such and such percentile when it came to CARS, is I started having this kind of strange experience where when I would start reading something, especially for me, the humanities are the hardest. The social science are much easier for me because I am trained that way. But something that is history or art is a little more challenging for me. And I would start to think of people I knew where I was sure that if they were there right now reading the same passage, they'd be getting it and I'm not. And that was actually my experience. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. And so think about how much extra mental energy must be going into that. It's not conscious, right? It's automatic, it's subconscious. But there was a part of my mind that was almost like competing inside of my mind with people that I knew from that I haven't seen in over 10 years, longer, that I was sure that they would do well on this passage and I'm not getting it. And then all of a sudden my focus was lost. So just start to be aware of those tendencies and keep this in mind. When it comes to MCAT questions, almost all of the questions, they're pre-vetted, they're very carefully chosen, and they are designed to be answered correctly by approximately 40 to 60% of students. That means it's a well-done question. When you have a question that only 10% of students are answering correctly, a lot of times, it could be that it's just a challenging question. There are some questions like that are still good questions. Usually questions like that get thrown out because there's something ambiguous or odd about them that isn't quite tapping into what the MCAT wants to test. So know that you really can't predict how well somebody else is going to do on a passage. The person who always got higher grades than you in such and such class, because the truth is there really isn't that much wiggle room between something that a lot of people are understanding and very few people are understanding. And overall, most people are missing about half the questions anyway. And that's also something that takes a little bit of time to get used to. Okay, so another question that I often get from students who've taken some time off is, what's the best way to balance content review and practice questions when you're coming towards the end of your prep and you know that you need to be doing more of the answering the questions, and yet every question you answer incorrectly actually takes you running in the opposite direction to go onto Wikipedia or to dig up the textbooks or go online and try and learn something that you now realize, oh, and I didn't know that either. Okay, so how do you stay focused on answering practice questions when there's this part of you that just knows that you still don't know all the content? And the answer to that is that just knowing that that's the reality, knowing that all the way up until the end, you will be encountering topics that you either don't know or that you once knew and now you forgot, or that you forgot to study, because it's so much material. And I've spoken with some students who scored in the top 2-3% who told me their experience of, on test day, the day of the test, realizing that there was, some aspect about, the digestive system that they suddenly realized that they didn't know. And then, they felt so compelled to look it up on that day, and they used the discipline to just let it go. And so that's what you're going to need to be doing towards the end, is you will want to do some of that, checking your answers, going back, doing some research, but you want about 80% of your time towards the end to be answering practice questions, taking practice tests, and reviewing your answers. See, if there was one other thing that I hear a lot from students who identify as non-traditional, it's this concern that because they've taken time off, or because maybe they were a humanities or social science major or business major before, that they're not going to be taken seriously by admissions committees, okay? So this isn't specific to the MCAT, but it somewhat is, because what they then tell me, because I do the MCAT work, is do I have to do even better on the MCAT to prove myself? And the answer to that is, if I had to say yes or no, my answer would be no. I think that applications are looked at holistically. They really are. There are some cutoff lines based on MCAT and grades, requirements, making sure that you have the experience you need, that your application's complete, things like that. But really, you are being assessed as a package, and that includes your time off. It includes what you did as an undergraduate. A lot of times that really does work to your advantage. That's not just something people say to make you feel better. It really is true. It really can be true. And especially if you believe it, if you can take the time to say, why does this make me a better candidate to yourself, then you're going to be that much more convincing. And you're going to have that much more confidence when you sit down to take the MCAT, because you realize it is just one component of your overall application. And it's just one stage of your overall journey to becoming a doctor. And so the last thing I want to say is just that one thing I love about the MCAT is that it's one of those standardized tests where students always have the potential to really surprise themselves with how much better they can do. It's something where we regularly see students who the first time they applied, they got in the 25th percentile, the next time the 85th, after having gone back and done adequate study and maybe taken a year and really brushed up on their deficits from before. And I love that about it. It's not at all true that it's set in stone what type of an MCAT score you're going to get. You have the potential to excel. And it's going to take time. For those of you who are working full-time or have families, I really, really encourage you to see if you can give yourself more time to prep. See if you can give yourself 6 months, because you might not have 8 hours a day, the way that some people who are in different lifestyle situations have the luxury of doing. So give yourself the time to move slowly, to learn thoroughly, stay on track. If you get behind track, revise your plan and get back again. Know that it's the norm. I've heard that inspirational speakers say things like that. I've always kind of liked that. If you think about when a pilot that is navigating, most of the time they're off course. Most of the time they're just course correcting to get back on course. That's the reality of it. You go one direction, you start to realize you've gone a little bit too far, you have to adjust. And a lot of studying for the MCAT is that way. You get too far into the content, you have to do some more practice questions. You get too much into the nitty-gritty, you have to come back up and see the big picture again. You do one schedule, it's not working for you, you might have to switch to another schedule. You start mornings, you have to end doing maybe just a couple marathon days and not doing every day in the morning. It's the reality of it is that it takes flexibility, and you're not alone in that. That's the norm. If that's happening to you, it means that you're normal and you're experiencing MCAT prep. So I encourage you to try and find other students who are in situations like you, because all of this will be reflected in what they share. I know I hear it all the time. So I hear from so many students, and I'm here to tell you that this is what many, many, many students are telling me. And if you're able to find those support groups, maybe online, maybe through, your undergraduate institution might have some sort of groups that you're still eligible to participate in. I really encourage you to seek those out, and definitely let us know here at Magoosh what we can do to better serve you as a student and as a prospective doctor.